quote, taken from Irish rapper Macklemore, directly correlates to the reality of the situation that came after the Civil War. With all the growth of business occurring, economy rising, and new laws being enforced, what you see is not what you get. Society was much, much more corrupted. This is the not-so-fabulous life of the Gilded Age. From 1877 to 1893, the world was on its way of progression to move out of harm's past. The laws were passed, strikes were called, and boycotts were done. This time was in the drive of collective bargaining for one and for all. Collective bargaining was the result of unfair treatment of workers. The Sherman Antitrust Act was used to try and stop the protests of any union activity that promoted it. Factory acts were a set of laws that were passed concerning the safety and well-being of the factory workers, mostly children and women. Factory acts were passed from 1833 to 1901. As a result of the factory acts passed, anyone younger than 12 couldn't work. There were many other laws passed in between those years, and the laws became more and more strict on child labor. The Knights of Labor were established in 1869. It was a group of people who promoted social and cultural uplift of the working class. They rejected socialism, radicalism, and supporters of the Republican Party. It was almost a miniature labor union. They lobbied for 8 hours a day, the end of child labor and convict labor, and graduated income tax. They also supported the Chinese Exclusion Act and contract labor law, which boiled it down to banning immigrants in the U.S., which was not good at all. The American Federation of Labor was a group around the country known to call strikes and boycotts to provide relief for the engaged in work stoppage for workers' demand. They wanted short hours, high wages, sanitary working conditions, and gain for fair collective bargaining. In the raw truth about the AFL, they had race issues that hampered their expansion. You can guess who they excluded. There was not much effect done by the AFL, even if they had notable events of uprising of the 20,000 and the Great Revolt in 1909 to 1910. Action finally took place after a fire at the Triangle Shirtwaist factory that killed 146 men and women. The found causes were locked doors, broken fire escapes, poor communication, and firefighting equipment. It was only then the government enforced inspection. International Ladies Garment Workers Union were very much like the American Federation of Labor, for they were even part of them at one point, though in 1937 they were expelled from them. The Age.wmv was one of the several organizations at the Jewish Labor Committee's founding, where they organized anti-Nazi activities. They provided aid to persecuted European trade unionists, and their faulty ways were within the leaders who excluded colors once again, and despite the name, made men a large portion of leaders, not women.
Do you want a taste of soda that's good? Enough of that plain old soda. Have a taste of Coca-Cola. Coca-Cola contains 2 to 3.5% traces of cocaine and caffeine. It is not recommended that you consume an extreme amount of Coca-Cola in one particular day, for caffeine and cocaine are both habit-forming and could damage your health.
Now introducing the Sherman Antitrust Act. It was a great act that promoted social and cultural uplift of the working man that rejected socialism and radicalism. Though it was not nearly organized enough, it was classified as a small union. Their aim was to gain an 8-hour day in child and convict labor and graduated income tax. What was not too known, though, was that they supported the Chinese Exclusion Act and the contract labor law. The Wabash case of 1886 was a case that ultimately limited how much control the states have on interstate commerce. Interstate commerce was the trade and market between territories, whether it be through our international stays or outside of the country. This case evidently led to the Interstate Commerce Act. Much like the Antitrust Act, the Interstate Commerce Act was created to alter job ethics and conditions. This act granted the railroads the first industry subject to federal regulation. These legislatures had established a 5-member enforcement board, most commonly known as the Interstate Commerce Commission, in response to the public. This was probably the most response from the public words done by them. Though, as a man named Watie has stated, a state should be able to take action in the public's interest without impairing that federal control. Pools and rebates are ways to make a little extra money. Pooling is basically reducing the appearance of competition between two companies and work together to make more money. Rebates are giving a partial refund to the valued customer. The objective of a rebate is giving discount to a valued customer so they will continue to seek your services and establish regular customers. An example of a rebate is when John D. Rockefeller made a deal with the railroad company to ship oil around the country to get reduced price for the exchange of using railroad services. This specific scenario stirred the community of working class, especially the farmers who needed to use the railroad system for their crops. People were outraged because they were being overcharged for the use of railroad, while people like John D. Rockefeller paid much less for the exact same service. Railroads were a form of public utility. The railroads were mainly to provide a way for transportation and a way for America to be independent. The railroads certainly allowed farmers to live by higher living standards. It provided a way to transport their goods fast and cheap versus transporting by horse or ship. It was an innovation that made way for advancements in the community, especially for the farmers. Railroads truly proved to be just like a gilded flower. It allowed much positive step forward in the industry. At the same time, it exploited the farmers out of their money by overpricing services of the railroads. They owned the land of the railroads, so of course they had the right to charge whatever price. It definitely became a case of abusing power, and it took as far as going to court in an attempt to resolve the problem. Block voting is when a group of people vote together for the same person based on thoughts they have in common. The Granger followers were considered block voters since they voted for the same ideas. The Grangers shared a disagreement with the railroads that were being built since the railroad company charged the farmers a lot of money to transport their crops. Grangers had started out as farmers but began to dabble in politics. From the Granger movement came something called the temperance movement. The Munn versus Illinois case came about because of the Illinois legislature responding in 1871 to pressure from the National Grange, an association of farmers, by setting maximum rates that private companies could charge for the storage and transportation of agricultural products.
Textile factories are a common workplace in today's time, and workers are in high risk of tuberculosis. Tuberculosis is a disease spread by droplet infection. You may be prone to contracting this disease simply by inhaling the mist from an infected person's cough or sneeze. Symptoms include, but are not limited to, feeling unwell with a cough, green or yellow sputum coughed up when awakened, more sputum streaked with blood, low-grade fever, cold sweat or fever breaks at night, low appetite, chest pain, pus discharged through skin. If you feel as if you may have contracted tuberculosis, there is still hope. If you wish to be diagnosed and treated, call this number right away, 206-143-1216. Again, that is 206-143-1216.
Thomas Nass is not the creator of Uncle Sam in Columbia. I am. He simply took credit for my work and is making money from what I should be getting. Mark Twain recognized him for his civilization and progress, but it wouldn't have been that way if it weren't for me. Thomas Nass used his power to manipulate the society through his cartoons. He created bad images of the people he didn't like or agree with.
You more than any other man have won a prodigious victory for Grant. Rather, for civilization. He brought to light a lot of the corruption and fraud inside of politics, and learned to say that the good must be extended to all of society before it can be held secure by any one person or class. America's future will be determined by the home and the school. The world is wide,
and I will not waste my life in friction when it could be turned into momentum. Nothing ever comes to one that is worth having, except as a result of hard work. Success in life is founded upon attention to the small things rather than the large things. To be a poor man is hard, but to be a poor race in the land of dollars is the very bottom of hardships. Well then, is it American to let people starve and die in ignorance? Is exploitation and robbery of the poor American?
Chartist movement basically started out as a big protest. Involvement with the police doused the flame from the Chartists, and because they feared it would turn into a war, they quickly killed and arrested people who were part of the movement. The power that the Chartists had intimidated the government. Just as many powerful movements and people in history, those associated with the Chartist movement were persecuted. As a result, Chartism died out. The Gilded Age definitely pushed to challenge the long-established ideas. Karl Marx's theory basically suggested that what the economy needed was someone in charge. Almost like a director of a movie, making sure the scenes come together as one successful movie. Basically, he said that the economy needed a director. It was a good thing for the economy. It promised longevity and successful economy. Karl Marx's theory had its faults, all the same. It placed the future of America in a stranger's hand. More times than not, people in power are often consumed by greed. The rise in population in Europe played a big role in the industrialization in the States. The rise in population encouraged many people to move to the States as immigrants. The land of opportunity is what they were told America would be like. Immigrants are always an easy target for cheap labor. They contributed a lot to the Industrial Revolution. People didn't appreciate the corrupt ways of the industry and the fact that people had to work and pay. They were also mad that technology was replacing jobs for other people. These people were frustrated with the corrupt ways of the industry and took their frustrations out on the next level. People became hostile towards each other and often resulted in breaking machinery and killings in the name of lewdism. Speenhamland is like the food stamps of the Gilded Age, except that you had to work for what you get instead of getting it for free. Essentially, Speenhamland is a law that says that you get paid a certain amount for working depending on how many kids you have, if you have a wife or not, and the price of food at that time. They were paid higher based on the price of bread and number of wives and children in the house. Kind of like food stamps. You could get money on a card based on how many dependents you have. Also like food stamps, you could easily get discontinued from work or getting money. It promoted early marriages and a motive for having children. This never reached national level, but these laws and acts passed on from area to area because it was so popular. They laid off people at no mercy, no concern for how that affected a family. They demolished houses to reduce population, and as you can imagine, this was a hard time for many families.
Despite having tuberculosis in her spine, was able to travel abroad to Europe and met social workers in London. When she came back to the States, she established a settlement called the Hull House in Chicago. The settlement provided public services such as classes on vocational skills, music, art, drama, and English. She saw how many people relied on the services at the settlement. Jane took in many people and realized that she could never end poverty with the Hull House. She took her concerns to a political level and appealed and lobbied for reform. She was most known for fighting for women's rights. Jane also fought for labor laws, against immigration exploitation, and mandating public school for all.
Booker T. Washington was an educator, author, and orator. He was affiliated with the Republican Party. Booker T. was the president of the Tuskegee Institute, the first major black industrial college. He wasn't very concerned with equal rights. He was more interested in black people having economic independence. He didn't address lynching and other acts of racism going on at the time. He insisted blacks going to live with it. His ideas raised a lot of critique in the black community.
And there you have it. This is the not-so-fabulous life of the Gilded Age. Society in this time went from an okay-looking kind of structure to being covered up in gold to appeal to all in the world. only to cover the pure corruption the Great Appeal had hidden away in the dark. It is only now that we will be able to stride from this destruction and repair ourselves to be better than we once were.